The morning Dorothea Kane packed her trunk, she did not cry. She had expected to. She had rehearsed the feeling so many times in the small hours before dawn, lying in the dark of a bedroom that smelled of cedar and old paper, and the particular cold that her husband kept in every room from November through March. As though warmth itself were a kind of extravagance he refused to allow. She had imagined tears. She had imagined trembling hands and second thoughts, and the long familiar pull of a life she had built here, room by room, year by year, until it was the only life she knew. But when the morning came, her hands were steady. She folded her dresses with the same quiet efficiency she had brought to every task in this house for 4 years. She did not take anything that was not hers. She left the pearl earrings he had given her on their wedding day on the dressing table, set precisely in the center of the cloth, the way she imagined he preferred things, centered, ordered, requiring nothing of him. She closed the trunk, she called for the carriage, and she left. It had begun, as so many things do, with a practical arrangement between men. Her father, a solicitor of modest reputation and considerable debt, had introduced her to Mr. Edmund Kane at a dinner in the autumn of 1887. Edmund was 31, Dorothea was 23. He was the kind of man who entered a room and made other men stand slightly straighter. Not because he was loud or dramatic, but because there was something in his bearing that suggested he had already assessed every person present and found them marginally insufficient. He was handsome in the way that expensive things are handsome, immaculate, cold to the touch. He had spoken to her father for 3/4 of an hour. He had spoken to Dorothea for perhaps 12 minutes. 2 weeks later, her father had come to her room and told her that Mr. Kane had made an offer. She had asked what kind of offer. Her father had smiled in the way men smile when they mean the only kind that matters. She had said yes, because she understood that yes was what was needed from her. The Kane name would settle her father's accounts. The Kane house would give her a position in society she could not have achieved alone. These were the facts of the matter, and Dorothea had always been a practical woman. She had not expected to be happy. She had expected, perhaps, a certain respectful distance, the kind that existed between two people who understood they were performing a function. What she had not expected was to find, in her first week in Edmund's house, that the distance he maintained was not respectful at all. It was simply absence. He was there and not there simultaneously, the way a piece of furniture is there. Occupying space, registered only when moved. She learned quickly that he preferred silence at dinner, that he took his breakfast alone in the study, that when his associates came to the house, she was expected to appear briefly, smile graciously, and then disappear again, like a pleasant illusion that did not benefit from prolonged examination. She had tried, in the early months, to make something of it. She had reorganized the household accounts, which had been kept sloppily by the previous housekeeper, and were hemorrhaging money in small, invisible ways. She had planted a kitchen garden that, by spring, was producing more than the cook could use. She had quietly established a small school for the tenant children on the eastern edge of the Kane property, using her own savings and a room above the old granary that had not been touched in years. Edmund had not asked about any of it. She had mentioned the school once, over dinner. He had looked up from his plate with an expression of polite vacancy and said, "I see," in the tone of a man hearing information about a country he has no intention of visiting. Then he had returned to his food. She had not mentioned it again. What broke her, what she would think about later, in the months after she left, when she was trying to locate the precise moment she understood she had to go, was not what Edmund said to her. It was what he said about her. It was a Tuesday evening in October, the second year of their marriage. She had come downstairs earlier than usual, because she could not sleep, and as she passed the closed door of the library she heard his voice, low and easy in the way it never was with her, warm in the way she had forgotten warmth could sound. She had not meant to listen. She had stopped because she heard her own name. Dorothea is, well, she's a Vance girl, you know what that means. Decent family, wrong end of it. Father had debts. She came with the understanding that the arrangement was practical on both sides. A pause. Then, "She manages the house well enough. I have no complaints there. But between us, Hargreaves, the woman is a ghost, present and completely invisible at the same time. I sometimes think she chose that on purpose, to make herself as little trouble as possible, like a servant who knows her station." Laughter. Another voice, amused. "Does she know that's how you think of her?" Edmund's voice again, unbothered, the way a man is unbothered when discussing a chair. "I shouldn't think she thinks about it at all. She seems content enough. Some women are, with very little." Dorothea stood in the hallway for a long moment. Then she walked upstairs, very quietly, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and did not sleep at all. She had known the marriage was not a love match. She had never pretended otherwise, not even to herself. But there is a significant distance between not loved and invisible, between practical arrangement and present and completely invisible at the same time, between a woman who understood her situation clearly and a woman who had just heard herself described as a ghost who chose her own haunting. She sat with it all night, and by morning she had made a decision that took her another 2 years to act on, because she was, whatever Edmund thought, a patient woman. She spent those 2 years watching. She watched the way he was with his associates, the ease in his shoulders, the way he laughed fully, the way he engaged with ideas and argued and conceded and came back sharper. She had not known he could do any of those things. With her he was so consistently absent that she had begun to wonder, in the early days, if something was wrong with him. She understood now that nothing was wrong with him. He simply did not find her interesting enough to be present for. She watched herself too. She watched the way she moved through his house, and she could not stop thinking of it as his house, even when the household was entirely her management. With the careful economy of someone who has learned to take up as little space as possible, she heard his voice in her head sometimes when she reached for something, present and completely invisible. And she would pull her hand back and be a little smaller again. She did not want to be smaller. In the 3rd year of their marriage, she wrote to her cousin Margaret, who lived in Philadelphia and had married a professor, and seemed, from her letters, to live a life of considerable intellectual and domestic contentment. She asked, in careful language, whether the spare room in Margaret's house was occupied. Margaret wrote back within a week. "The room is yours whenever you need it," she said, "and I will ask no questions until you are ready to answer them." Dorothea read the letter twice. Then she put it in the bottom of her hat box, beneath the green velvet one she never wore, and continued on. She continued because she had the school to think about. 14 children now, ranging from 6 to 13, in the granary room every weekday morning. She had hired a young woman from the village, Miss Polly Hatch, to teach the younger ones their letters while she worked with the older ones on sums and geography, and, when no one of consequence was around to object, history. The children were bright. They were hungry for things she could give them. She could not leave them without arrangements made. She spent the better part of a year making arrangements. She found funding through 2 women in the county, whose husbands had civic ambitions, and who were therefore amenable to supporting visible charitable works. She convinced Edmund's land agent, a man named Cooper, who had more decency than his employer, to put the granary room in the official property ledger as a school, which gave it a kind of institutional permanence that did not depend on her continued presence. She trained Miss Hatch in the mathematics curriculum. She wrote a full year's lesson plans. By the time she was done, the school did not need her. She packed her trunk on a Wednesday morning in March of 1891, and her hands were steady, and she called for the carriage, and she left. She did not tell Edmund she was going. She wrote him a letter, which she left on the desk in the library. His library, with his books and his whiskey, and his very comfortable chair in which he had, as far as she knew, never once thought of her. The letter was 3 paragraphs. It said that she had gone to stay with her cousin in Philadelphia. It said that she did not intend to return. It said that she wished him no ill and expected none from him, and that she trusted he would find the household accounts in order. She signed it D. Kane, not your wife, not with regards, just the name he had given her that had never quite felt like her own. She did not hear from him for 6 weeks. When his letter arrived in Philadelphia, it was 1 page, formal, the handwriting precise as everything about him was precise. He expressed surprise at her departure. He noted that her absence had been remarked upon by several people. He inquired as to whether she intended this to be permanent, as there were legal and social complications he would need to address if so. He did not ask if she was well. He did not ask if she had been unhappy. She wrote back 1 sentence. "I intend for it to be permanent, and I trust you will address whatever needs addressing." Philadelphia suited her. Her cousin Margaret was exactly what her letters had suggested. Warm, curious, slightly chaotic in the best way, married to a man named Professor Aldous Fenwick, who thought about everything too hard and apologized for his opinions even when they were right. The house was full of books and arguments and undergraduate students, who came for dinner and stayed until midnight. It was the loudest, most opinionated household Dorothea had ever been in. She loved it immediately. She found work within 2 months. Not because she needed the money, though Edmund's monthly allowance, which continued with the mechanical reliability of a man who kept his obligations if not his warmth, was modest. She found work because she needed somewhere to put herself. A girls' school on Spruce Street was looking for someone to teach mathematics and natural history. She applied. She was hired. She taught 6 classes a day in a room with windows that faced east and filled with morning light. And she was good at it in a way that surprised her, only because no one had ever told her she was good at anything. The girls called her Mrs. Kane at first, with the careful deference of students testing the temperature of a new teacher. By autumn they called her Miss Vance, her maiden name, which she had reclaimed for professional use. And the correction had been so natural that no one had remarked upon it, as though the name had simply been waiting for her to pick it up again. She did not think about Edmund often. When she did, it was with a curiosity that surprised her. Not bitterness, not grief, but the particular detached interest of someone who had lived a long time inside a mystery, and now, from the outside, could finally see its shape. She thought about the way he had never once asked her what she thought about anything. She thought about the 14 children in the granary room, and whether he had even known about all of them. She thought about the kitchen garden, and the reorganized accounts and the 4 years she had spent quietly making his house better, and how none of it had made him see her. She had given a great deal, she thought, not to him. She had long since stopped feeling anything so coherent as love for Edmund Kane. But to the idea of what the marriage could be if she just made herself useful enough, small enough, necessary enough. She had bargained with her own visibility. It had not worked. She was 31 years old in the autumn of her first year in Philadelphia, and for the first time in her adult life she occupied the full dimensions of herself, without adjusting for someone else's comfort, and it felt, if she was honest, something very close to relief. Edmund Kane did not lose his wife in a single moment. He lost her slowly, in the way you lose daylight, by not noticing until suddenly it's gone and the room has been dark for some time. The first weeks after her departure he had managed with the particular composure of a man who believes a thing can be resolved if it is simply treated as a logistical problem. She had gone. She would return, or she would not, and in either case the household would continue. The cook was competent. The accounts were, as she had noted in her letter, in excellent order. He had examined them the week after she left with the private intention of finding some error, some evidence of disorder, and had found instead books that were more carefully maintained than anything his father's estate manager had produced. He had put the ledger away and not thought about it. He thought about the library, though. He thought about it in the evenings when he sat with his whiskey and the fire that the housemaid now kept badly. Too high and then too low, never the sustained warmth Dorothea had somehow achieved without ever seeming to manage it. He sat in his chair and thought, with some irritation, that the house was quieter than it should be, which made no sense because Dorothea had never been loud. She had been, he remembered his own words, a ghost. He turned the word over. He had meant it, when he said it to Hargreaves, as simple description. She was quiet. She kept to herself. She was present and invisible, and he had thought at the time that this was a compliment of a kind. He had no patience for demanding women, women who required constant attention and reassurance. Women who filled rooms with their anxieties and expectations. Dorothea had never done any of those things. He had been grateful for it. He was less certain now about what he had been grateful for. He had a meeting in March with Cooper, his land agent, about the Eastern property. Cooper had laid out the accounts for the quarter, and at the bottom of the page was a line item Edmund did not recognize. Granary room, school, quarterly maintenance. Edmund had looked at it. "What is this?" he said. Cooper had looked slightly uncomfortable. "The school, sir. Mrs. Kane established it. Oh, it must be 3 years ago now. 14 children currently enrolled, from the tenant families mostly. Miss Hatch runs it. Very well, I'm told." Edmund had said nothing for a long moment. "Mrs. Kane organized the funding herself," Cooper continued, in the tone of a man who was beginning to suspect he was saying something his employer should have already known. "Spoke with Mrs. Harrington and Mrs. Price about the philanthropic angle. Their husbands were amenable. The whole thing runs without any cost to the estate." Edmund had looked at the ledger line for another moment. Then he said, "She never mentioned it." Cooper looked at him steadily. "Perhaps she didn't think you'd want to be bothered with it, sir." He had left the meeting and walked the long way back to the house, through the eastern fields. He had passed the granary. Through the window he could see a young woman at the front of the room, and, arranged at small tables, children ranging from very young to nearly adolescent. All bent over slates with the focused quiet of people doing something they found worth doing. One girl, small and dark-haired, was working a problem with such concentration that her tongue was pressed to her upper lip. He had watched them for longer than he meant to. He thought about Hargreaves, and the dinner in October, and the way he had described his wife to another man as a ghost, who had chosen her own invisibility. He thought about what it meant, exactly, that she had built a school on his property without his knowledge. Not out of secrecy, but simply because she had not expected him to be interested. He thought about the kitchen garden. He had never actually walked through it. He had seen it from the window sometimes, neat rows, orderly beds, and registered it the way he registered most things Dorothea did. As background, he wondered, standing in the cold field, what else he had registered as background. He wrote to his mother that evening. His mother, Mrs. Lucille Kane, lived in Bath, and had opinions about everything, and he had learned over the years to deploy her as a sounding board when he could not think straight alone. He wrote to her about Dorothea's departure and found, setting the words down, that he could not make the situation sound as simple as he had believed it to be. He wrote for 2 pages, and then stopped and read what he had written and put it in the drawer. He wrote a shorter letter. He asked if she had known about the school. His mother wrote back within the week. Her letter was 4 pages. She had known about the school, yes. Dorothea had mentioned it in one of her occasional, brief letters, the ones she always signed warmly and that Lucille had always thought were the letters of a woman who had learned to take up very little space, even on a page. She had thought at the time that it was a good thing, a sign that Dorothea was finding her own way within the marriage. What I had not known, his mother wrote, was that you didn't know. Edmund, she built a school on your property and you didn't know. I am asking you to sit with that for a moment before you do anything else. He sat with it. He sat with it for several weeks, which became several months, which became the better part of a year of sitting with various things he had not previously examined. He thought about the dinner with Hargreaves. He thought about it so often that it took on the quality of a wound he kept pressing. He had called her a ghost. He had said, to another man, with the ease of someone stating a comfortable fact, that she had chosen her own invisibility. He had meant it as a neutral observation. He understood now, with a slowness that embarrassed him, that a woman does not choose invisibility out of preference. She chooses it out of understanding. She makes herself invisible because she has learned, through accumulated small evidence, that being visible is not available to her. He had taught her that, not deliberately, not with malice, which somehow made it worse. He wrote to Dorothea in Philadelphia. Not the brief, logistical letter he had written before. A different letter. He did not draft it multiple times, because he was not sure he could survive the shame of reading a draft. He sat down and wrote it all at once, and did not look at it again before he sealed it. He told her about the school. He told her he had not known, and that not knowing was his own fault, and that he had been thinking about why he had not known and was not satisfied with any of the reasons he arrived at. He told her about the kitchen garden, which was producing well under the gardener's continued care, and about the accounts, which his solicitor had reviewed and found impeccable. He told her that these were small things to say, and that he understood they were small, and that he was not writing because he expected anything from her. He wrote, I have been trying to understand what kind of man does not notice, for 4 years, the shape of what his wife was doing. I have not yet arrived at an answer that reflects well on me. He sent the letter. He did not expect a reply. He had not, he told himself, deserved one. Dorothea read his letter 3 times. The first time she read it as data, assessing it for what it was, what it wasn't, whether it was the kind of letter a man writes, because he wants something returned to him. The second time she read it for honesty. She knew Edmund's writing. She had 4 years of brief notes and formal correspondence to compare against. This was different. This was, she thought, a man who had discovered something about himself that he was not enjoying. The third time she set it down and looked at the window and thought about the school. She did not write back immediately. She waited a week, then 2. She went about her life. Her classes on Spruce Street, her evenings with Margaret and Professor Fenwick, and the rotating assembly of opinionated students, her Saturday morning walks through Rittenhouse Square, where she had developed the habit of sitting on the same bench with a book and a cup of coffee from the cart near the fountain. She realized on one of those mornings, genuinely happy in a way she had not been since before she understood what her marriage was going to be. Not ecstatically, not dramatically, just, quietly, sustainedly, in the way that people are happy when their days belong to them. She wrote back. Her letter was shorter than his. She told him she was glad about the school. She told him that Cooper had been the one who made it possible for it to outlast her. She told him, because it seemed important to say, and she was no longer in the habit of not saying important things, that the reason she had never mentioned any of it to him was that she had learned very early in their marriage that he was not interested in hearing about it. She wrote, "I do not say that with anger. I say it because I think you should know the evidence I was working from, if you are genuinely trying to understand what happened." She signed it Dorothea Vance. They wrote to each other for 6 months. His letters got longer. Hers stayed spare. He asked her questions about the school, about her work in Philadelphia, about things she had thought and not said during the years they lived together. She answered with the careful honesty of a woman who had spent 4 years measuring her words and was now, cautiously, allowing herself to use more of them. He did not ask her to return. She did not offer to. In the spring he came to Philadelphia on business. He wrote to tell her. He did not suggest they meet. She wrote back and suggested they meet. They had lunch at a restaurant Margaret recommended, which was perhaps Margaret's way of being involved. They sat across from each other for the first time in over a year, and Dorothea looked at the man she had married and thought, "He looks different." Not in any visible way she could have pointed to. He was the same Edmund, the immaculate coat, the careful posture, the face that gave very little away. But there was something in how he listened that was different. He was present in a way he had not been across any of the hundreds of dinners they had shared. He asked about her teaching. He asked specific questions. What the girls were like, what curriculum she preferred, whether she found the mathematics more natural or the sciences. He asked as though he wanted to know, and she watched him carefully as she answered, and she could not find the vacancy she had learned to expect. After walking back toward the hotel district in the mild March air, he said, "I owe you an apology for a great many things. I have been trying to work out how to say that in a way that doesn't ask you to do something with it." She considered this. "That's a very precise way to put it," she said. "I've been practicing." She almost smiled, I could tell. They walked another block in the quiet that had always existed between them, but which felt, this time, like something other than absence. "I don't know what you want," he said. "From this, from any of it. I am not asking you to tell me. I just want you to know that whatever it is, I am prepared to listen to it." Actually listen. She thought about the hallway, the closed library door, his voice, easy and unbothered, describing her to another man. She thought about the granary window, and the girl with her tongue pressed to her lip. And all the mornings in Philadelphia, when she had walked into a room full of students who were glad to see her. She thought about what it would mean to go back, and what it would mean to not go back, and what it would mean if going back were, finally, her own choice made freely, with full information, by a woman who knew what she was worth and would not accept less. "I am not ready to answer that," she said. "I know, but I am willing to continue this." She gestured between them, the letters, the lunch, whatever this was. "For now," he nodded. "For now is more than I expected," he said quietly, and she could tell he meant it. They parted at the corner of Spruce and Broad. She walked back to Margaret's house in the lengthening afternoon, and she did not feel grief or longing, or the bittersweet ache of stories that end too neatly. She felt something smaller and truer, the particular steadiness of a woman who has stopped bargaining with her own visibility and has decided, at last, to simply be seen on her own terms. The cherry trees along Spruce Street were beginning to open. A child on the opposite sidewalk was counting her own footsteps aloud. A vendor called out the price of violets from a cart, and the sound carried in the clear spring air further than it should have. The way sounds do sometimes, when you have finally learned to listen.